I pulled into my driveway after a brutal 12-hour shift at the hospital, every muscle in my body screaming for rest. But something felt wrong immediately. The space where my brand new Ford Explorer should have been sitting was completely empty, just bare concrete staring back at me like a cruel joke. I blinked hard, thinking exhaustion was playing tricks on my mind, but the driveway remained stubbornly vacant. My heart started hammering against my ribs as I noticed Dad lounging on the front porch, swing casually sipping sweet tea like absolutely nothing had happened. When I demanded to know where my $55,000 SUV had vanished to, he actually chuckled and said they gave it to Tom because he deserved it more as the man of the family. I stood frozen on the sidewalk staring at my father like he had just spoken in a foreign language. The words bounced around inside my skull, refusing to make sense. My SUV, my brand new SUV that I had worked double shifts for 2 solid years to afford, gone. Given away like it was some old piece of furniture cluttering up the garage. You did what? I managed to croak out my voice barely above a whisper. Dad set down his glass of tea and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, completely unbothered by my obvious shock. Now don't get all worked up, Bernadine. Tom needs that vehicle more than you do. He's got a wife and kids to think about responsibilities. You're just one person, and you can take the bus to work perfectly fine. The casual way he dismissed my life, my needs, my 2 years of sacrifice hit me like a physical blow. I felt my knees go weak as the full reality crashed over me. This wasn't just about a car. This was about everything I had ever done for this family, every dollar I had handed over without question, every time I had put their needs before my own. "Where is Tom now?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Before Dad could answer, the front door creaked open and Mom shuffled out onto the porch, wringing her hands like she always did when trouble was brewing. Gloria Patterson had spent her entire life avoiding confrontation, smoothing over problems instead of solving them. "Oh, honey, I tried to tell your father this was a bad idea," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "But you know how he gets when he makes up his mind about something." I studied her face, searching for any sign that she had fought harder than her usual half-hearted protests, but I could see the truth written in the way she hunched her shoulders and fidgeted with her wedding ring. She had let this happen just like she let everything else happen. "Mom, I bought that SUV because a patient's husband threatened me in the hospital parking lot last month. I needed something safe, something reliable. You remember me telling you about that, right?" Her face crumpled with guilt, but Dad waved his hand dismissively. "That was just some crazy person blowing off steam. You don't need some fancy vehicle to feel safe. Tom's got real problems to deal with." Real problems. As if my safety, my security, my hard-earned money meant nothing compared to whatever mess my younger brother had gotten himself into this time. The pattern was so familiar it made my stomach turn. Tom would screw up Dad, would panic about his precious son, and somehow I would end up paying the price. "How long has Tom been unemployed this time?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those looks that married couples perfect after decades together. The look that said they had been keeping secrets and hoping I wouldn't ask the hard questions. "About 8 months, Mom admitted quietly, ever since the manufacturing plant closed down. But Sarah's been picking up extra hours at the grocery store and they're managing just fine." Managing just fine, with a second baby on the way and no steady income. Tom had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong even when he was doing everything wrong. When he got arrested for fighting outside a bar 2 years ago, I had paid his bail and his lawyer fees. When he couldn't make his wedding expenses, I had covered the reception hall and the photographer. When Mom and Dad almost lost their house because Dad got laid off from his construction job, I had quietly paid their mortgage for 6 months until he found work again. And this was how they repaid that loyalty. By giving away the one thing I had bought purely for myself, the one symbol of my independence and financial security. "Bernadine, you've always been such a generous girl." Dad said, his tone turning wheedling. "You understand family comes first. Tom's got mouths to feed." Generous girl. As if my years of nursing school, my professional achievements, my financial responsibility were just hobbies I played at between being the family ATM. As if the money I earned belonged to all of them by default, and I was selfish for wanting to keep any of it for myself. I opened my mouth to unleash 2 years' worth of suppressed resentment when Mrs. Patterson from next door came hurrying across her lawn, still wearing her gardening gloves and looking deeply troubled. "Bernadine, honey, I hate to be the bearer of bad news," she said, slightly out of breath from rushing over. "But I saw your brother driving your SUV about an hour ago, and he was all over the road. Nearly clipped a school bus turning onto Maple Street. The police were chasing him, but he managed to get away somehow." The blood drained from Dad's face so fast I thought he might faint right there on the porch. Mom let out a small gasp and pressed her hand to her chest, and I felt something cold and sharp settle in the pit of my stomach as the full horror of what they had done began to unfold. Mrs. Patterson's words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, choking us all with their implications. I watched my father's confident expression crumble as the reality of what he had unleashed began to sink in. "He was swerving," Mom whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh, dear Lord, please tell me no one got hurt." Mrs. Patterson shook her head, but her expression remained grim. "The school bus driver managed to avoid him, thank goodness. But Bernadine, there were children on that bus, little children heading home from summer camp." My hands started shaking as I imagined my SUV careening into a bus full of kids, my insurance information tied to a vehicle being driven by someone who shouldn't even be behind the wheel. The liability alone could destroy me financially, never mind the moral weight of knowing I had inadvertently put innocent lives at risk. "Dad," I said, my voice deadly quiet, "when was the last time you actually checked Tom's driver's license?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, and I could see him mentally scrambling for an answer that wouldn't make him look like the fool he was rapidly proving himself to be. "Well, I just assumed," he started, then trailed off as the full scope of his assumption began to dawn on him. "You assumed," I repeated flatly. "You gave my $55,000 SUV to someone without even checking if he was legally allowed to drive it." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Bernadine, there's something else you should know. My late husband worked for the police department for 30 years, and I still have friends down at the station. Tom's license has been suspended for 6 months now. 3rd DUI offense." 3rd DUI. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my father given my vehicle to someone who wasn't legally allowed to drive, he had given it to someone with a serious drinking problem and a history of endangering other people's lives. Mom started crying, then not the gentle tears of a concerned mother, but the harsh sobs of someone whose world was falling apart around her. "I knew something was wrong," she choked out between gasps. "I knew Tom wasn't acting right, but I thought maybe he had just learned his lesson after the last time." What last time? I demanded, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. "He got pulled over 3 weeks ago for weaving between lanes," Dad admitted reluctantly, "but he told us he was just tired from working late. We believed him because we wanted to believe him. Working late, at a job he didn't have. The lies were piling up so fast I could barely keep track of them all. How long had my family been living in this elaborate fantasy where Tom was a responsible husband and father instead of a repeat offender with a drinking problem? "There's more," Mrs. Patterson said gently, clearly reluctant to pile on additional bad news, but knowing I needed to hear it. "I've been keeping an eye on the neighborhood since the break-ins started last month. Tom's been coming and going at all hours using different vehicles every time. I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to cause family trouble by mentioning it. Different vehicles. My blood ran cold as the implications sank in. If Tom had been driving different cars to avoid police detection, that suggested a level of criminal planning that went far beyond simple drunk driving. What kind of different vehicles? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Mostly older cars that looked like they had seen better days, but always different license plates, always different models, like he was trying not to be recognized. Dad slumped down onto the porch swing like someone had deflated him. For the first time since this nightmare began, he seemed to grasp that his favoritism toward his son had potentially made him an accessory to serious criminal activity. Jesus Christ, he muttered under his breath. What has that boy gotten himself into? Before anyone could answer, Mrs. Patterson's expression changed as she remembered something else. Oh, and Bernadine, I recorded the whole thing on my phone when I saw the police chase. I was thinking about posting it on the Neighborhood Watch Facebook page as a warning, but maybe you should see it first. She pulled out her smartphone and scrolled through her video gallery until she found what she was looking for. The footage was shaky, but clear enough to see my distinctive red SUV weaving erratically down the street before suddenly lurching to the right and slamming into a fire hydrant with a sickening crunch of metal and plastic. Water erupted from the damaged hydrant like a geyser, flooding the intersection as my brother stumbled out of the driver's seat and took off running down an alley. The front end of my SUV was completely demolished steam, rising from the crushed hood as water continued to gush around the wreckage. I stared at the screen in numb horror as the full financial reality hit me. Not only was my vehicle destroyed, but I was going to be liable for the property damage, the water waste, the emergency response costs, and potentially any injuries Tom might have caused while fleeing the scene. 2 years of double shifts. 2 years of eating ramen noodles and skipping movies and buying generic everything so I could afford something nice for myself. 2 years of sacrifice destroyed in less than an hour because my father thought his son deserved my hard work more than I did. Where is he now? I asked, surprised by how calm I sounded, despite the rage building inside my chest like a nuclear reactor approaching meltdown. Mrs. Patterson shrugged helplessly. The police lost him somewhere in the residential area behind the shopping center. But Bernadine, there's something else. Something that might explain why Tom has been so desperate lately. She paused clearly, struggling with how much to reveal. My friend Janet works at the pharmacy on 5th Street. They've been robbed 3 times in the past 2 months, always by someone matching Tom's description. The police haven't been able to prove anything yet, but... She didn't need to finish the sentence. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with horrible clarity. Tom wasn't just a drunk driver with bad judgment. He was a criminal who had been using stolen vehicles to commit serious felonies, and now my SUV was evidence in a police investigation that could destroy my life along with his. I stared at the wreckage of my SUV on Mrs. Patterson's phone screen, watching my financial future drain away, along with the water gushing from the broken hydrant. The rage that had been building inside me crystallized into something cold and sharp and utterly focused. "I'm calling the police," I announced, pulling out my own phone. "Now hold on just a minute," Dad said, struggling to his feet from the porch swing. "Tom is family. We don't call the law on family no matter what kind of trouble they get into." I looked at him with new eyes, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time in my adult life. This man who had raised me, who had taught me about loyalty and responsibility and doing the right thing, was asking me to cover up for a criminal because they shared the same last name. Family. I repeated, my voice flat as roadkill. Tom steals my car and crashes it into city property while driving on a suspended license, and you want me to pretend it never happened because we're family. "He didn't steal it," Dad protested weakly. "I gave it to him." "You gave him something that didn't belong to you. That's called theft, Dad. And when the person you give stolen property to uses it to commit additional crimes, that makes you an accessory." Mom let out a fresh wail of anguish, but I was past the point of caring about anyone's feelings except my own. I had spent 32 years putting my family's emotions ahead of my own well-being, and look where it had gotten me. I dialed 911 with steady fingers, ignoring Dad's increasingly frantic protests. When the dispatcher answered, I spoke clearly and calmly. "I need to report a stolen vehicle. My father gave my SUV to my brother without my permission, and my brother used it to flee from police after crashing into a fire hydrant. The vehicle is a 2024 Ford Explorer red license plate. I rattled off all the relevant information while Dad stared at me like I had sprouted horns. 20 minutes later, Detective Luis Rodriguez pulled into our driveway in an unmarked sedan. He was a compact man in his 40s, with graying temples and the kind of world-weary expression that suggested he had seen every type of family dysfunction imaginable. "Ms. Patterson," he said, approaching me with a professional smile. "I'm Detective Rodriguez. I understand you want to report a vehicle theft." "That's correct," I said, shaking his offered hand. "My father gave my SUV to my brother without my knowledge or consent. My brother then used the vehicle to flee from police after causing property damage." Detective Rodriguez pulled out a notebook and began taking down the basic information. Dad hovered nearby, wringing his hands and occasionally muttering about how families should handle their problems privately. "Sir?" The detective said patiently, "I need to explain something to you. The fact that you gave your son permission to take the vehicle doesn't matter legally unless you're listed as an owner on the title. Are you listed as an owner?" Dad shook his head miserably. "Then what you did was help facilitate a theft even if that wasn't your intention. Your son is now facing multiple charges, including grand theft auto driving on a suspended license, fleeing and eluding, leaving the scene of an accident and destruction of public property." The color drained from Dad's face as the detective laid out the potential consequences in stark legal terms. This wasn't some family squabble that could be smoothed over with apologies and promises to do better. This was serious criminal behavior with serious consequences. "Detective," I said, "there's something else you should know. My neighbor has video footage of the incident, and she mentioned that Tom has been suspected of robbing local pharmacies." Rodriguez's expression sharpened immediately. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see that footage, and I need to ask you some questions about your brother's recent behavior and associates." Mrs. Patterson handed over her phone, and we all watched the crash footage again. This time, Detective Rodriguez pointed out details I had missed in my initial shock. The way Tom stumbled out of the SUV suggested he was under the influence. The fact that he immediately fled instead of checking for injuries or calling for help indicated consciousness of guilt. The damage to my vehicle was extensive enough to require major repairs. "Ms. Patterson, I have some bad news about your insurance situation," the detective said gently. "Because your brother was driving without a valid license and potentially under the influence, your insurance company may deny coverage for the damage. You could be personally liable for the repairs and the city damages." I felt the ground shift under my feet as the full financial implications hit home. Not only had I lost my vehicle, I was potentially facing tens of thousands of dollars in damages I couldn't afford on a nurse's salary. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The vehicle damage alone looks like $15,000 to $20,000. The fire hydrant replacement and water damage could be another $5,000 to $10,000, plus whatever fines the city decides to levy for the disruption. $30,000, more than half my annual salary gone in an instant because my father thought his son deserved special treatment." "Detective," Mom said quietly, "what happens if we can't find Tom? What if he just disappears?" Rodriguez gave her a look that was both sympathetic and realistic. "Ma'am, your son is now wanted on multiple felony charges. We will find him eventually. The question is whether he turns himself in voluntarily or whether we have to track him down. Either way, he's going to face the consequences of his actions." Dad sat down heavily on the porch steps, the weight of his poor judgment finally crushing him. "This is all my fault," he whispered. "I just wanted to help my boy get back on his feet." "Sir," Detective Rodriguez said not unkindly, "helping someone get back on their feet means encouraging them to take responsibility for their actions, not enabling them to avoid consequences. What you did here was the opposite of helping." Before anyone could respond, the detective's radio crackled to life. He stepped away to answer it, speaking in low tones for several minutes before returning to our group with a grim expression. "Ms. Patterson, I need to speak with you privately for a moment," he said, gesturing toward his car. My stomach clenched as I followed him away from my family. Whatever he had to tell me was bad enough that he didn't want them to hear it. Ms. Patterson, he said quietly once we were out of earshot. Your brother isn't just wanted for the incident with your SUV. He's our primary suspect in a series of pharmacy robberies that have been happening across the county over the past 3 months. We've been tracking him for weeks, but he's been smart about using different vehicles and hitting targets in different jurisdictions. The world tilted sideways as I processed this information. Tom wasn't just a desperate man making bad choices. He was a career criminal who had been systematically robbing businesses while my family remained oblivious to his true nature. Do you have any idea where he might be hiding? Detective Rodriguez asked. Any family or friends who might be helping him? Any places he might consider safe? I thought about my brother's life, trying to remember if he had mentioned any close friends or favorite hangouts. But the truth was, I realized with a start, I barely knew Tom as an adult. I had been so busy playing the role of responsible big sister and family ATM that I had never bothered to look closely at who he had actually become. I honestly don't know, I admitted. I've been working so much lately that I haven't spent much time with him. But detective, there's something you should probably know. Tom has been living with his wife and kids in a rental house about 5 miles from here. If he's not there, his wife Sarah might know where to find him. Rodriguez nodded and made another note in his book. We'll be paying Ms. Thompson a visit very soon. In the meantime, Ms. Patterson, I want you to be very careful. Your brother is facing serious prison time, and desperate people sometimes do desperate things. Don't go anywhere alone for the next few days and call us immediately if he tries to contact you. As we walked back toward my family, I felt a strange sense of clarity settling over me. For years, I had been enabling Tom's irresponsible behavior just as much as my parents had, just in different ways. Every time I bailed him out financially, every time I covered for his mistakes, I had been teaching him that his actions didn't have real consequences. Well, now they did. And for the first time in my adult life, I was going to let him face those consequences alone. Detective Rodriguez and I rejoined my parents, who were huddled together on the porch, looking like survivors of a natural disaster. The detective closed his notebook and gave us all a serious look. Folks, I need you to understand how serious this situation has become, he said. Tom isn't just facing charges related to the vehicle incident. Based on our ongoing investigation, he's suspected of multiple pharmacy robberies across 3 counties. This is federal crime territory now. Mom made a sound like a wounded animal pressing her hands to her mouth, as if she could somehow hold back the horrible reality of what our family had become. Dad aged 10 years in 10 seconds, his face going gray as ash. Pharmacy robberies, he whispered. But Tom told us he was looking for work, interviewing with different companies. He said things were getting better. Sir, Detective Rodriguez said gently, addicts become very skilled at telling people what they want to hear. Based on the pattern of crimes and the prescription medications that were stolen, we believe your son has been feeding a serious drug habit. Drug habit. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I thought about all the times over the past year when Tom had seemed thin, jittery, unable to sit still. I had attributed it to stress about unemployment, worry about providing for his family. Now I understood I had been watching my brother slowly destroy himself with chemicals, and none of us had been brave enough to see it. How long, I asked, how long has this been going on? Based on our investigation, probably about 18 months. The robberies started small, hitting the same pharmacy multiple times. But lately, he's been escalating. Hitting bigger targets, stealing larger quantities. That suggests his addiction has been getting worse. A car door slammed in the driveway, and we all turned to see Sarah climbing out of her beat-up Honda Civic with her 2 small children in tow. She looked exhausted and worried, her 7-month pregnant belly straining against a faded maternity top. "Frank, Gloria, have you seen Tom?" she called out as she approached the porch. "He never came home last night, and I found—" She stopped short when she noticed Detective Rodriguez, her face going pale. "What's going on?" Why are the police here? The next few minutes were some of the hardest I had ever witnessed. Watching Sarah's face as Detective Rodriguez explained Tom's criminal activities was like watching someone's entire world collapse in real time. She went through denial, anger, bargaining, and grief, all in the span of a few minutes, her hands protective over her unborn child as the father of her children transformed from absent husband to wanted criminal. But he told me he had a job interview yesterday. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said he was finally going to get back on his feet. He even showed me the address where he was supposed to meet with the manager. "Ma'am," Detective Rodriguez said softly, "what address did he show you?" Sarah recited an address that was 3 blocks away from the pharmacy that had been robbed 2 days earlier. Tom had been lying to his pregnant wife about job interviews while actually planning crimes. The level of deception was staggering. "I found these in our bathroom this morning," Sarah said, pulling a small plastic bag from her purse. It contained what looked like pill fragments and a small spoon with burn marks. "I didn't know what they were, but I was scared they might be dangerous for the children to find." Detective Rodriguez examined the items with the practiced eye of someone who had seen this exact scenario play out hundreds of times before. "Ma'am, these are drug paraphernalia. Your husband has been using prescription painkillers, probably opioids based on the residue pattern." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank down onto the porch steps, her children clustering around her with the instinctive protectiveness of kids who sensed their world was falling apart. The 3-year-old kept patting her arm and asking why Mommy was crying, while the 5-year-old stared at the detective with wide, frightened eyes. "How am I going to support 3 children by myself?" Sarah whispered. "I only work part-time at the grocery store. Tom cleaned out our bank account last week, said he needed money for interview clothes, but there's nothing left. Nothing." My heart broke for her, but it also crystallized something important in my mind. Tom hadn't just been stealing from strangers. He had been stealing from his own family, lying to his pregnant wife, endangering his children's future. This wasn't addiction making him do desperate things. This was selfishness, using addiction as an excuse. "Sarah," I said, kneeling down beside her on the steps, "I want you to know that whatever happens with Tom, the kids will be okay. We'll make sure they're okay." She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. "Bernadine, I'm so sorry about your car. I had no idea Frank had taken it. If I had known what Tom was planning—" "This isn't your fault," I told her firmly. "You've been lied to just as much as the rest of us." Detective Rodriguez's radio crackled again, and he stepped away to take another call. When he returned, his expression was even grimmer than before. "Folks, we need to wrap this up. We just got word that Tom used your stolen vehicle in another crime last night before the chase. He robbed a 24-hour pharmacy on the east side of town, and the security footage shows him clearly. This case just became a lot more serious." The silence that followed was deafening. Another robbery, using my SUV. While I was working at the hospital saving lives and helping people, my vehicle was being used to terrorize innocent pharmacy workers and steal controlled substances. "Detective," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my head, "what do I need to do to protect myself legally? I mean, if my SUV was used in multiple crimes, am I going to be held responsible?" "As long as you cooperate fully with our investigation and press charges for the theft, you should be protected. The fact that you reported it stolen as soon as you discovered what happened will work in your favor." Press charges against my own brother. The brother I had bailed out of jail, twice the brother whose wedding I had helped pay for the brother I had loved and protected his entire life. But as I looked at Sarah's tear-streaked face and her frightened children, I realized that protecting Tom from consequences hadn't protected anyone else from the damage he caused. It had just enabled him to hurt more people. "I want to press full charges," I said clearly. "Whatever it takes to make sure he can't do this to anyone else." Dad made a sound of protest, but I held up my hand to stop him. "No, Dad, this stops here, right now. Tom made his choices, and now he gets to live with the consequences." Before anyone could respond, we heard a rustling sound from the backyard. Detective Rodriguez immediately tensed his hand, moving instinctively toward his weapon. "Everyone stay calm," he said quietly. "Miss Patterson is there? Any reason someone would be in your backyard?" "No," I said, my heart starting to race. "No one should be back there." The rustling sound came again, followed by what sounded like metal clanging against wood. Detective Rodriguez motioned for us all to move toward his car while he called for backup. But before we could move, a familiar figure emerged from behind Dad's tool shed, stumbling slightly as he walked across the lawn toward us. Tom looked like he hadn't slept in days, his clothes dirty and wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot and wild. And in his right hand, he was carrying a crowbar. "Well, well," he said, his voice slurring slightly as he swayed on his feet. "Looks like the whole family's here for the reunion. How touching." Detective Rodriguez stepped protectively in front of Sarah and the children, speaking calmly but firmly. "Tom, I need you to put down the weapon and step back. No one wants anyone to get hurt here." Tom laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Hurt? You want to talk about getting hurt? How about what this family just did to me? How about my own sister calling the cops on me like I'm some kind of stranger?" He pointed the crowbar at me, and I saw 20 years of resentment and entitlement burning in his eyes. This wasn't the brother I remembered from childhood. This was a dangerous stranger wearing my brother's face. I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "Put the weapon down and we can talk about this." Talk. He laughed again, the sound even more unhinged than before. "Time for talking is over, sister. Time for you to fix the mess you just made." Tom advanced across the lawn with unsteady steps, the crowbar gleaming dully in the afternoon sunlight. His eyes darted between Detective Rodriguez and me, calculating and wild at the same time. The man standing in front of us bore little resemblance to the brother I had grown up with. This version of Tom was hollow-cheeked and manic, his skin bearing the telltale grayish pallor of someone deep in the grip of addiction. "You know what your problem is, Bernadine," he said, his words slurring together as he fought to maintain his balance. "You always thought you were better than me, Miss Perfect Nurse with her perfect job and her perfect little life. Well, look around, sister. Your perfect life just got real ugly real fast." Detective Rodriguez had his radio in his left hand, speaking quietly into it while keeping his eyes locked on Tom. I could hear him requesting immediate backup, but I knew it would take several minutes for additional officers to arrive. In the meantime, we were on our own with an armed, desperate man who had nothing left to lose. "Tom, listen to me," Dad said, his voice shaking as he stepped forward. "Son, put that thing down. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. We're family." Family. Tom spun toward Dad with a bitter smile. "You want to talk about family, old man? How about the fact that you mortgaged your house 6 months ago to give me $20,000 for my business venture? How about the fact that Mom's been finding my drug gear in your garage and cleaning it up instead of confronting me? How about the fact that everyone in this family has been enabling my problems instead of helping me solve them?" The admission hit us all like cold water. Dad had mortgaged the house without telling me. Mom had been covering up evidence of Tom's drug use. My family had been living in an elaborate web of lies and denial, while I worked myself to exhaustion trying to stay financially stable. "You gave him $20,000. I asked Dad, unable to keep the shock out of my voice. "He said he was starting a landscaping business," Dad said weakly. "He had business cards printed and everything. I thought—" "You thought what you wanted to think," Tom interrupted. "Just like you always do. Just like you gave me Bernadine's car because you wanted to believe I deserved it more than she did." Sarah stood up slowly from the porch steps, her hands protective over her pregnant belly as she faced her husband with a mixture of fear and fury. "Tom Thompson," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, "what have you done to our family? What have you done to our children?" Tom's expression softened slightly when he looked at his wife, but the crowbar remained steady in his grip. "Sarah, baby, I did everything for you and the kids. Everything I did was to try to provide for my family." "Stealing prescription drugs is providing for your family," Sarah shot back. Robbing pharmacies is taking care of your children. Tom, look at yourself. Really look at yourself. You're high right now, aren't you?" The truth of her words was written all over Tom's face. His pupils were dilated, his movements erratic, his thought patterns clearly compromised by whatever chemicals were coursing through his system. "I'm fine," he insisted. But even as he said it, he swayed dangerously and had to use the crowbar to steady himself. "I'm handling my business. I'm handling everything." "Handling everything," I repeated, finding my voice again. "Is that what you call it when you steal my car and crash it into a fire hydrant? When you terrorize pharmacy workers? When you lie to your pregnant wife about having job interviews?" Tom's face darkened with rage as he turned back toward me. "You have no idea what it's like, do you? You, with your steady paycheck and your health insurance and your retirement fund, you have no idea what it's like to watch your family struggle while your sister has everything handed to her. Handed to me." The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. "Tom, I worked 2 jobs through nursing school. I've been pulling double shifts for 2 years to afford that SUV. I've bailed you out of jail twice, paid for your wedding, covered Mom and Dad's mortgage when they were behind. Nothing in my life has been handed to me." "Boo-hoo," Tom said mockingly. "Poor little Bernadine working so hard. You know what I've been doing while you were playing nurse? I've been trying to figure out how to feed my kids when there's no money for groceries. I've been trying to keep my family together when everything's falling apart." "By becoming a drug addict and a criminal," Detective Rodriguez said firmly. "Sir, I need you to understand something. The path you're on doesn't lead anywhere good. Put down the weapon and let us help you get clean. Let us help you become the father your children deserve." Tom laughed bitterly. "Help me get clean? You mean help me go to prison for 10 to 15 years? That's not help, officer. That's the end of my life." "Your life is already over," Sarah said quietly, and something in her tone made everyone freeze. "Tom, look at yourself. Really look. You're standing in your father's backyard, high on drugs, threatening your family with a weapon. This isn't you getting your life together. This is you destroying everything you claim to love." For a moment, Tom's facade cracked, and I caught a glimpse of the scared, desperate man underneath all the bravado and anger. He looked at his children clinging to their mother's legs, at his parents watching him with horror and disappointment, at me standing next to a police detective who was preparing to arrest him. "I just wanted to matter," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I just wanted to be important to someone to be needed, but everything I touch turns to garbage." "Tom," I said softly, "you matter to all of us. That's why this hurts so much. But threatening people and stealing things isn't going to make you feel important. It's just going to make everything worse." For a heartbeat, I thought he might actually listen. I thought the rational part of his brain might override the desperation and the drugs and the rage. But then his expression hardened again, and he raised the crowbar higher. "You know what, sister? I think it's time you learned what it feels like to lose everything, just like I'm about to lose everything." He took a step toward me, and Detective Rodriguez immediately moved to intercept him. But I held up my hand to stop the officer pulling something out of my pocket that made Tom freeze in place. My smartphone with the voice recording app clearly visible on the screen. "Tom," I said calmly, "I've been recording this entire conversation. Every threat, every confession, every admission of guilt. And you know what? This recording is already uploaded to the cloud and being sent to Detective Rodriguez's email address as we speak." Tom stared at the phone like it was a venomous snake. "You're bluffing." I turned the screen toward him so he could see the recording app running the timer, showing that it had been capturing audio for the past 15 minutes. "I'm a nurse, Tom. I deal with life and death situations every day. I've learned to think ahead to prepare for emergencies to protect myself and my patients from people who might hurt them. Did you really think I wouldn't be smart enough to protect myself from you?" The crowbar dropped from Tom's nerveless fingers as the full implications of what I had done sank into his drug-addled brain. Everything he had just said, all the confessions and threats and admissions of guilt, were now permanently recorded and in the hands of law enforcement. "You set me up," he whispered. "No, Tom," I said sadly. "You set yourself up. I just gave you enough rope to hang yourself with." The crowbar hit the grass with a dull thud that seemed to echo across the suddenly silent backyard. Tom stared at my phone like it contained his death sentence, which in many ways it did. His drug-clouded mind struggled to process the reality that his own words had become the evidence that would put him in prison for the next decade or more. "You think you're so smart," he said. But the venom had drained out of his voice, replaced by a hollow desperation that was somehow worse than his earlier rage. "You think you've won something here." "This isn't about winning, Tom," I said, keeping my phone held up where he could see it. "This is about protecting innocent people from someone who's proven he can't control himself." Detective Rodriguez spoke quietly into his radio again, and I could hear sirens approaching from multiple directions. Tom heard them too, and something wild flickered across his face as he calculated his chances of escape. "Don't even think about running," I warned him. "I've been documenting your behavior for months, not just today. I have photographs of the drug paraphernalia Mom found in the garage. I have screenshots of the suspicious activity on my credit cards after you stole my wallet information. I have recordings of the conversations we had when you asked me for money and couldn't explain what you needed it for." Tom's face went white as he realized the scope of what I had been doing. While he had been spiraling deeper into addiction and criminality, I had been quietly building a case against him. "You see, Tom, I figured out months ago that something was seriously wrong. When you asked me for $500 to fix your car, and then I saw you driving the same broken-down Honda a week later, I started paying attention. When you told me you were interviewing for jobs but could never remember the names of the companies or what positions you were applying for, I started taking notes." The sirens were getting closer now, and Tom was starting to panic. He looked around the backyard like a trapped animal searching for an escape route that didn't exist. The pharmacy robberies were just the confirmation I needed. I continued my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Detective Rodriguez, show him the surveillance footage from last night's robbery." The detective pulled out a tablet and scrolled to a video file. The black and white security footage clearly showed a man in a hooded sweatshirt threatening a pharmacy technician with what appeared to be a weapon. When the man turned toward the camera, Tom's face was clearly visible despite his attempt to hide his identity. "We've been tracking you for weeks," Detective Rodriguez explained. "The only reason we hadn't arrested you yet was because we were trying to identify all of your accomplices. But when you used Miss Patterson's stolen vehicle in yesterday's robbery, you gave us everything we needed to close the case." 3 police cruisers pulled into the driveway, their officers quickly surrounding the backyard to cut off any possible escape routes. Tom looked at the approaching officers, then at his family, then back at me, with something that might have been respect mixed with hatred. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "Since the day I realized that helping you avoid consequences wasn't actually helping you," I replied. "Every time I bailed you out of jail, every time I gave you money without asking questions, every time I covered for your mistakes, I was making it easier for you to hurt other people. I was making myself an accessory to your crimes." The first officer reached us, and Detective Rodriguez quickly briefed him on the situation. Tom didn't resist as they placed him in handcuffs, though he kept staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. "You know I'm going to prison for a long time," he said, as they prepared to lead him away. "Yes," I said simply, "and maybe that's what it's going to take for you to get clean and figure out how to be the man Sarah and your children deserve." Sarah stepped forward, then her face streaked with tears, but her voice strong. "Tom, I want you to know that I'm filing for divorce. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that love is enough to fix addiction and criminality. But I also want you to know that if you get clean, really clean, and if you can prove that you're serious about being a father, I won't keep the children from you." Tom's composure finally cracked completely. He started crying, then not the manipulative tears of someone trying to avoid consequences, but the genuine anguish of a man who finally understood what his choices had cost him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know you didn't," Sarah said sadly, "but intent doesn't matter when the results are this devastating." As the officers led Tom toward the police cars, Detective Rodriguez turned to me with an expression of professional respect. "Ms. Patterson, I have to say I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've rarely seen someone handle a family crisis with this level of planning and composure. Your documentation is going to make our case much stronger." "Detective," I said, "there's something else you should know. When I was going through Tom's belongings that he left at my parents' house, I found a notebook where he'd been planning additional robberies. There are at least 6 more pharmacies on his target list, including the one at my hospital." The detective's eyebrows shot up. "He was planning to rob your workplace." Next week, according to his notes, he'd figured out the shift schedules and identified the security weaknesses. If this hadn't happened today, he would have put my co-workers and patients at risk. As we spoke, crime scene technicians were already processing Tom's hiding spot in Dad's tool shed. They emerged with bags of evidence, stolen prescription bottles, drug paraphernalia, falsified identification documents, and detailed plans for future crimes. Dad sat on his porch steps with his head in his hands, finally understanding the full scope of what his favoritism and enabling had unleashed. Mom stood beside him, no longer crying, but wearing the shell-shocked expression of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered. "Bernadine," Dad said without looking up, "I don't know how to apologize for this. I don't know how to make it right." "Dad," I said gently, "you make it right by never enabling destructive behavior again. You make it right by getting counseling to understand why you thought protecting Tom from consequences was more important than protecting innocent people from Tom. You make it right by supporting Sarah and those kids instead of making excuses for their father." As the last police car pulled away with Tom in the back seat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the complete absence of guilt about setting boundaries with my family. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen justice over false loyalty, and the relief was overwhelming. Mrs. Patterson approached me as the crowd began to disperse, her face full of concern and admiration. "Bernadine, honey, are you okay? That was incredibly brave, but it must have been terrifying." "You know what's funny, Mrs. Patterson?" I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. It wasn't terrifying at all. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was actually protecting my family instead of just enabling their worst impulses. As I looked around at the aftermath of the day's events, I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their destruction. Tom would have continued escalating his criminal behavior until he either killed someone or got himself killed. By stopping him now, I had potentially saved lives, including his own. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be court appearances, family therapy sessions, financial challenges, and the long process of rebuilding trust and relationships on healthier foundations. But for the first time in years, I felt optimistic about the future. Because now my family knew that love without accountability isn't love at all. It's just elaborate enabling disguised as affection. 3 months later, I sat in a courthouse that smelled like old wood and broken dreams, watching my brother shuffle into the defendant's chair in an orange jumpsuit and shackles. The transformation was startling. Prison had stripped away the manic energy of his addiction, leaving behind a hollow-eyed man who looked older than his 29 years. But for the first time in months, his eyes were clear. Judge Catherine Morrison reviewed the case file with the methodical precision of someone who had seen this particular tragedy play out countless times before. The charges were read aloud: multiple counts of pharmacy robbery, grand theft auto driving on a suspended license, fleeing and eluding law enforcement possession of stolen property, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have pleaded guilty to all charges. Before I pronounce sentence, do you have anything to say to this court?" Tom stood slowly, his public defender rising beside him. When he spoke, his voice was steady but thick with emotion. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to everyone I hurt during my addiction. I want to apologize to the pharmacy workers I terrorized, to the police officers I endangered during the chase to the city, for the property damage I caused. Most of all, I want to apologize to my family, especially my sister Bernadine, whose car I stole and whose life I turned upside down." He paused, looking directly at me for the first time since his arrest. "Bernadine, I know you can't forgive me right now, and I don't expect you to, but I want you to know that everything you did was right. You saved my life by refusing to enable me anymore. You saved other people's lives by stopping me before I hurt someone. I'm grateful, even though it took me 3 months in jail to understand that." Judge Morrison nodded approvingly. "Mr. Thompson, addiction is a disease, but crime is a choice. The court recognizes your efforts at rehabilitation during your incarceration, and we've received positive reports from your counselors. However, the severity and scope of your crimes require significant consequences." She sentenced Tom to 12 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years contingent on completing addiction treatment and maintaining sobriety. It was a harsh sentence, but fair given the circumstances. As the bailiff led Tom away, he caught my eye one more time and mouthed the words, "Thank you." I nodded back, feeling a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Justice had been served, but it had come at a tremendous cost to everyone involved. Outside the courthouse, Sarah waited for me with her newborn daughter sleeping peacefully in a carrier. The baby had been born healthy despite all the stress of Tom's arrest and trial. Sarah had named her Hope, which seemed both optimistic and defiant under the circumstances. "How are you holding up?" I asked, studying Sarah's face for signs of the breakdown I had been expecting for months. "Better than I thought I would be," she admitted. "The divorce was finalized last week, and I've started getting victim services support. They're helping me apply for programs that will let me finish my nursing degree while the kids are young." Nursing degree. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tom's wife was following in my professional footsteps, building a stable career that would allow her to support her family independently. "Sarah, I want you to know that my offer still stands. If you need help with childcare while you're in school, or if the kids need anything." She smiled, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, it reached her eyes. "Bernadine, you've done enough, more than enough. You gave me the gift of seeing the truth about Tom's addiction, and that allowed me to protect my children and myself. That's the greatest gift anyone could have given me." We walked together toward the parking lot where my fully repaired SUV waited gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. The insurance company had not only covered all the damages, after reviewing the police evidence, they had also apologized for their initial denial and upgraded my coverage at no additional cost. "Any word on how your parents are doing with the counseling?" Sarah asked. I nodded, feeling cautiously optimistic about that front as well. Dad's starting to understand how his favoritism contributed to Tom's sense of entitlement. Mom's learning to speak up instead of just enabling bad behavior to keep the peace. It's slow progress, but it's real progress. Frank and Gloria had indeed sold their house to pay for family therapy and to establish a college fund for Tom's children. They had moved into a smaller apartment, which had initially felt like a step backward, but was proving to be exactly what they needed to focus on rebuilding their relationship on healthier foundations. "And what about you?" Sarah asked. "How are you doing with everything?" I considered the question seriously. The past 3 months had been the most challenging of my life, but also the most rewarding in unexpected ways. "I got promoted to head nurse last month," I told her. "Turns out that standing up to Tom gave me the confidence to start advocating for myself at work, too. And I started dating someone." "Really?" Sarah's eyes lit up with genuine pleasure. "Tell me about him." "His name is Marcus, and he's a nurse practitioner at the Children's Hospital. We met at a conference on family addiction issues. He grew up with an alcoholic father, so he understands the whole dynamic of enablement and recovery. What I didn't tell Sarah was how revolutionary it felt to be in a relationship with someone who respected my boundaries instead of constantly testing them. Marcus had never asked me for money, never made me feel guilty for having standards, never made me feel like I needed to choose between self-respect and family loyalty. "I'm so happy for you," Sarah said, and I could tell she meant it. "You deserve someone who appreciates how strong you are." Strong. 6 months ago, I would have described myself as responsible, reliable, generous, hardworking, but strong. That was a new identity forged in the crucible of refusing to be a victim of my own family's dysfunction. "Sarah, can I ask you something? Do you think Tom will actually get clean in prison?" She was quiet for a long moment, bouncing the baby gently as she considered her answer. "I think prison might be the first place Tom has ever been where his addiction can't be enabled by people who love him," she said finally. "There's no one there to give him money when he claims he needs it for emergencies. There's no one there to make excuses for his behavior. There's no one there to clean up his messes. So, yes, I think he might actually have a chance." We reached our cars and Sarah strapped the baby carrier into her back seat with the practiced efficiency of an experienced mother. Before getting into her Honda, she turned back to me with a serious expression. "Bernadine, I need you to know something. When I look at my daughter, I think about the world Tom was creating for her with his addiction and his crimes. A world where her father was a criminal, where money came from illegal activities, where family members enabled destructive behavior instead of holding each other accountable. You saved her from growing up in that world. You saved all of us from that world." As I drove home to my own apartment, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that terrible afternoon when I came home to find my SUV missing. I was living independently for the first time, dating someone who treated me as an equal partner, excelling in my career and maintaining relationships with my family that were based on mutual respect rather than financial manipulation. But the most important change was internal. I had learned the difference between helping and enabling, between love and codependency, between family loyalty and family dysfunction. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's self-destruction. The support group I had started attending for family members of addicts had taught me that my story wasn't unique. Millions of people struggled with the question of how much to help family members who made destructive choices. The answer, I had learned, was that you help by holding people accountable, not by protecting them from consequences. 6 months later, I received a letter from Tom written on prison stationery. He'd been clean for his entire incarceration and was working toward his GED. He thanked me again for having the courage to stop enabling his addiction, and he asked if I would consider visiting him once he had completed 1 year of sobriety. I wrote back and told him I would think about it, because while I had forgiven him, I had also learned that forgiveness didn't require me to return to old patterns of relationship. Any future contact would be contingent on him demonstrating sustained change, not just promising it. Mrs. Patterson had become something of a neighborhood hero after her decisive actions during Tom's arrest. She'd been elected to chair the Neighborhood Watch Committee and had organized a series of community meetings about recognizing and responding to drug activity in residential areas. Detective Rodriguez had used our case as a training example for other officers dealing with family crime situations. He had particularly emphasized the importance of supporting family members who chose to cooperate with law enforcement rather than enable criminal behavior. And Sarah had indeed returned to school pursuing her nursing degree with a focus on addiction counseling. She had found her calling in helping other families navigate the complex dynamics of addiction and recovery. As for me, I had learned that true strength comes not from avoiding difficult choices, but from making them anyway. I had learned that family love means wanting the best for people, not enabling the worst in them. I had learned that sometimes you have to be willing to let people face the consequences of their actions if you want them to have any chance of learning from those actions. Most importantly, I had learned that protecting myself didn't make me selfish. It made me strong enough to help others from a position of stability rather than desperation. The road to recovery, whether from addiction or from the trauma of loving an addict, is long and difficult, but it's a road that leads to authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation, and that destination is worth every difficult step of the journey. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is refuse to be rescued by someone who is drowning, because you can't save someone who doesn't want to save themselves, but you can save yourself, and in doing so, you can model for others what healthy boundaries and self-respect look like. That's the lesson I hope my story teaches. That love without accountability isn't love at all. It's just elaborate enabling disguised as family loyalty. And the most loving thing you can sometimes do is step back and let people experience the natural consequences of their choices. Because only when people can't escape the results of their actions do they have any incentive to change those actions. And only when you stop protecting people from their own poor decisions do you create space for them to make better ones. In the end, holding Tom accountable didn't destroy our family. It saved it. Because now we all understand that real love means wanting people to become their best selves, not protecting them from opportunities to grow. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you struggled with the question of when helping someone becomes enabling their destructive behavior? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and building healthier relationships. And please share this video with anyone who might benefit from learning about the difference between helping and enabling. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to set healthy boundaries in your own life. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's self-destruction. You deserve relationships based on mutual respect, not financial manipulation or emotional blackmail. Stay strong and take care of yourselves.